Welcome to the King Connections podcast. I'm your host, King, and I'm joined today by my guest, Reggie Marra from Fully Humans at Work, and my co-host on the Fully Human Connections podcast. So, how you doing today, Reggie?
I'm doing real well, King, and my day is always improved when I get to talk to you. So I'm doing extra well right now. Yeah,
Well, I appreciate that.
yeah,
Well, one of my questions that I like to begin with is, what's your spiritual energy number? And what I mean by that is, from the spectrum of 0 being life sucks to 10 being life is awesome, where would you say you fall into that right now?
Okay, so we're talking about right now, not in general in my life, but right in this at this moment.
Correct.
Yeah, so right now I'm coming in here with a 10 again for the same reasons that I just spoke to. You and I have been talking since June, I guess, in the Fully Human Connections, and my energy is just I'm zeroed in when we're together. I'm zeroed in at other times in my life as well, but for right now, in speaking to you this afternoon, I'm just really I have it pinned pretty well. I don't believe in saying if somebody gives me a range of 0 to 10, I don't believe in saying I'm an 11 or a 20 because I'm in the range, but I'm in a good place. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate, I asked that question because, like Einstein says, energy is everything and everything is energy. And I truly believe that.
Yeah.
And I've asked that question when I have meetings and when I'm at my speaking events. The reason I ask that question is because, with that being said, if there's a lot of twos and threes in the room, I ask people, you might as well leave the room. Same thing with a Zoom call, because I feel that this person's not going to be present, they're not going to be engaged, they're not going to want to be there, they're going to be antagonistic, and you're not going to be able to have a very productive meeting or a productive show
Yeah.
when a person's at that energy level. But when your person's at a 10, then, infinite possibilities are available. So thank you for engaging me with that.
Yeah. Thanks for asking. It's a great question.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. So to begin, what would you say is, what do you see as your purpose in life?
Yeah, so I actually spent a good deal of time in my 40s really pursuing that question, and to the extent where I actually went out to Utah and did a vision quest to get a clarity, vision of what my purpose is. Because I had been a high school, I think you know this, I was a high school teacher and basketball coach in New York for 13 years, and I was a college administrator for 7 years, and then I began doing teaching poetry in the schools, and that's right around the time I went out and I really wanted to get clear because I wasn't I wasn't making a lot of money in those professions, but I was doing good work that I believed in, and so I could tell a big long story, which I won't right now. But during the vision quest, I was basically told in a kind of comical moment um, that I was the man who finds the path with light. I didn't
Mm.
understand that in the moment that it was said to me because it was a literal truth in the moment. I was helping some people who were lost at night out in the Canyonlands, and I got them back to base camp with a flashlight. Um, and it took me, I don't know, 6 months or a year to begin to see the metaphorical implications of that, finding the path, helping others find the path with light. Um, so that's my purpose. I do it through teaching, through writing, through coaching, one-on-one professional coaching, through a variety of what I call delivery systems. But looking back now, I can see that that's what I've always been doing, both for myself, helping me find my path with light, and then also with other people, students, colleagues, clients. So yeah, so again, I could speak to that question for a long time because it took me a while to figure it out. Even though I was doing the things that fed my purpose, I didn't really know what the purpose was.
Mm.
Yeah.
So would you say that you agree with the logo, the logo theory treatment that Viktor Frankl advocates? That we are constantly seeking our purpose in life, and that's our greatest quest, as opposed to pleasure or power.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. And you and I have spoken a little bit about Viktor Frankl in the past. And the thing I'm not sure about is everybody doing that? I'd like to believe all of us are. Like, and this is me being judgmental, but I could point to some people and saying, are they really pursuing a purpose? Or are they just out there to take advantage, be opportunistic, and make a buck? So I don't know the answer to that. I hope Viktor Frankl is 100% right, that everybody in some way, shape, or form is doing that. I'm just not sure.
Well, it was interesting. I look at it this way, that I think for the people who are not, I think those are the people who are not happy.
Okay.
Like I don't think anybody, at least, and I could be wrong. I don't have any data to back this up, just my interpretation and my perception. But I have yet to meet a person who has said they discovered their purpose and are not unhappy or not happy as well.
Yeah.
Like, I'm a happy individual. You seem to be a happy individual. We both seem to be living our purposes.
Yeah.
But for the folks who I know who are unhappy, they haven't discovered what their purpose is. So it seems to be in line. Again, no real study has been done, and just my own personal conversations and assessments of people I've met along the way. Yeah. So that's how I look at that Viktor Frankl situation, that if you're not seeking your purpose or tuned into your purpose, then life is going to be fleeting in the context of joy, happiness, fulfillment, those things. But that leads me to my next question, which is, we hear the term a lot about conscious leaders. You're involved in conscious capitalism. You hear that term a lot. And I ask this question because it can have a different definition depending on who's been asked. A conscious leader can be someone who is environmentally conscious. Conscious leader can be someone who's societal conscious, or a little bit of both. And I know what conscious means in the dictionary, but I'm always curious to know from folks who are exhibiting these kind of behaviors and see themselves in this kind of space, how they personally define a conscious leader. So how would you define a conscious leader?
Yeah, I love that question. Just a real quick asterisk to your previous question. I love what you said about Viktor Frankl's, perspective about, people who don't know their purpose yet tend to be unhappy. So I think whenever Frankl gets quoted moving on, there should be an asterisk next to it with a footnote with your take on it, because that makes it easier for me. I definitely agree with that. So I just wanted to say that, because your take on it is that people who haven't found their purpose yet can tend to be very unhappy because their life is fleeting and they're just kind of fluttering around without direction. So I just wanted to say that. So thank you for that. So no conscious leader for me, and I didn't come here, I don't show up knowing exactly how I understand what a conscious leader looks like. But I would say that for me, the first characteristic of a conscious leader is that he or she is aware of his or her own worldview. So they're aware of their awareness. So in other words, they know where they're coming from, which allows them to then understand what's theirs in terms of biases and perspectives and what's somebody else's, and they don't confuse the two. So that would be the first thing. So for me, a conscious leader is conscious of or aware of his or her own, blessings and curses, basically, goodness and bias, in terms of unhealthy bias, because everybody, there's all kinds of biases. So it would definitely include that. And then I love the way you asked the question, because then depending on what or whom is being led, awareness of the environment of, I don't have a corporate background, so I wouldn't be a very effective corporate leader because I've never lived in that world. I've done coaching, of folks in the corporate world, but I've never actually been in that world. I care about the environment, but I don't know enough about the environment to be a leader in those realms. So I think having what we used to call, maybe we still call, an awareness of my domain expertise. What is it that I know about? I should be conscious. A conscious leader needs to be conscious of his or her domain expertise, even if they're kind of a generalist, which I think I am. So I think I might be rambling a bit, so I'll stop there. But the biggest thing for me is self-awareness. I don't think you can be a conscious leader if you're not aware of what's yours and what belongs out there to other people.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you and I have had a lot of different discussions, and this is a question I use to really help me evaluate whether or not I want to continue to build a relationship with somebody, professional or whatever it may be, and that is understanding what they see as your level of gratitude. And so, with that being said, of all the things you've achieved in your life, you've experienced in your life, what would you say that you're most grateful for?
Okay. So in terms of achievement, not just because I mean my gut, my gut response is always to, I'm grateful for breath, refrigerated with food and indoor plumbing and things like that. But in terms of things that I've done, and that's a really, it's a challenging question in one way because I've done some things I'm proud of as a teacher and as a coach and as a writer and a poet. But I think the one thing I'm most grateful for having done is that pretty much unconsciously early on and consciously into my 30s and 40s and 50s and beyond, I chose to only do work that I cared deeply about. And there's a mixed blessing here because I never took a job just to make money. I took jobs. I mean, I needed to be paid, but I took jobs that I really cared about doing. So, school teacher, high school level, coaching basketball, teaching poet, college administrator. Those were all things I cared about, and writing. So that decision, I'm grateful for having made that decision sometime in my 20s.
Hmm.
So, yeah.
Now, I had your partner on the podcast before, and he was doing a series of podcasts with us on the Fully Human Connections. And that's kind of how we came up with the name Fully Human Connections, kind of a combination of both our companies. Yeah. So I get a chance to ask you this question. What inspired you to co-found the Fully Human Network?
Yeah. Well, several things kind of intersected. And I think they had been percolating for some time. So you're referring to Kent Frazier, the co-founder. He and I co-founded Fully Human at Work in 2019, just half a year before COVID hit. And both of us have had experiences with suffering, either personally or in close family members with depression, anxiety, even suicide. And we had a conversation. It was in July of 2019, speaking about mental health, mental illness in the workplace and what it costs employers and the level of disengagement at work. And because we were tuned into that, we said, let's do something about it, with that or about it. We didn't, we were just throwing things against the wall, see what would stick. And the tagline I've been using for over a decade now for my coaching business is alleviating unnecessary suffering for the willing. So that's my elevator speech. People say, what do you do? I say, I alleviate unnecessary suffering for the willing. And some people say, wow, how do you do that? Because everybody suffers. Some people run away, but it's a good tagline. But Kent and I were really interested in this idea of alleviating suffering because, and this, I mean, the level of disengagement in the work world across industries and across types of work is significant, especially, but not only in the US. So we just began to put our heads together and said, with our respective tools, what could we offer people who are struggling to stay engaged at work? And then Fully Human at Work gradually emerged. We spoke about mental illness at work, mental health at work, mental fitness at work. We tried different iterations of it, but when we finally launched it, it was Fully Human at Work. But we wanted to alleviate unnecessary suffering. And for me, the word unnecessary is really important because I think if you're a human being, suffering finds you. But I've learned enough in my own life, and I have a lot of colleagues and friends and clients who have learned this too, that there is some suffering. And I laugh when I say it, it's not really funny, but we bring it on ourselves. It's unnecessary. And we can find ways to alleviate that unnecessary suffering sooner rather than later. And that's one of the underpinnings of that we invite people to explore in the Fully Human at Work program. I'll put a period there.
What's interesting is that, again, going back to Viktor Frankl, he talks about there's three things that we have to deal with as human beings, and that is death, that is suffering, and then there's this search or connection for our purpose. But he says that when a person finds their purpose, they're willing to accept suffering. And again, when I read the book, Man's Search for Meaning, that resonated with me because as an entrepreneur, when I chose the entrepreneur path, and I'm sure you probably can relate to this, and I'm sure other with my listening audience who are entrepreneurs can relate to it, the path is fraught with uncertainty. And you're going to suffer to some extent as a part of that. Sacrifices you're going to make, suffering in the context that relationships tend to not persevere through entrepreneurship, depending on at what stage a person may be mentally and maturity. And when you say eliminate or help a person alleviate unnecessary suffering, that's what really drew me into Kent when him and I first talked, is because when he had that as his purpose and his mission statement, that was so compelling to me. You don't meet people who's that's their mission, that's their goal, is to do that. So that was someone I had to, begin to look at ways to build with. And this brings me to another question. And I'm curious to know, what are your thoughts about the ideal of, and this is something I'm really advocating right now. And I really didn't think about this until I would say within the last, since COVID, really. That's when it really became more apparent to me. But this idea of co-creating and going out here and truly creating something with someone else. What is the criteria that you would put yourself through, or how do you determine this person I will co-create this particular ideal, business, poem, whatever it may be that you're creating?
So how would I choose someone with whom to do that? Yeah. So a bunch of things just fired. I'll just say them in no particular order. One is it has to be somebody I can have fun with. So if it's a slog, if we're not enjoying our time in co-creating, then why do it? I mean, I can think of some reasons to do it if we're trying to resolve a really important issue, but I want to be able to have fun when I'm working hard. That's one. Tied in with that is, the way I vote for political candidates, for people in government, is worldview, a similar worldview. I'll vote for somebody with whom I disagree on a given issue politically, if generally speaking, I feel that their worldview and mine are in sync. So the same thing with a co-creator. If I think generally speaking, our worldviews are, pretty similar, it's that would be a criterion as well. Those are probably the two biggest things. I can have fun with this person, and our worldviews are similar. No, actually, one last one. I'd rather have somebody who, with whom I have a complementary relationship rather than like a clone. Because we don't need two Kings or two Reggies or two Kents. I mean, maybe it'd be nice. I don't know. But it's really because Kent and I bring very different personalities and skill sets, despite having gone to the same coaching school and blah, 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 blah. So we really complement each other when we work together. And there are certain things that energize me that he doesn't like to do, certain things he's really good at and loves doing, but I hope I never have to do. So that kind of complementarity is really important as well. So have fun, similar worldviews, and complement rather than duplicate the personalities. Those would be the three things that surface immediately for me when you ask that. And I've never thought about that before. So I love that you asked that question.
No problem. Now, shifting the focus now to kind of your writing background and your interest in writing. And I'm always curious when I talk to authors, this particular question, what about writing compelled you? And I use the term compelled because you've written more than one book. So obviously you're a writer, you're an author. So what about writing compelled you to write your very first book, where you say, I'm going to put forth the discipline, the commitment, and just get it done?
Yeah. So I'm going to just qualify the question. So, because my answer would be different. Is it the first book I ever finished writing or the first book I ever published? Because those are not the same thing. I had, several before something got published, and I would give a different answer. So I'd be happy to go in either direction or both directions.
Well, the first one you actually finished writing.
Okay. So the first one I ever finished writing. So I loved writing as a kid. So I loved writing in elementary school and high school and in college. And I thought I was going to be the next great American novelist. So the first book I ever wrote was a fiction book. It was a novel length fiction. And the funny part about it is I loved to write, but what really drew me to write, I don't think I've ever shared this publicly before. So I take my mom to the eye doctor. I was probably in my early 20s, and I was waiting for her. And I was reading, I think, Time magazine or Newsweek in the waiting room. And in there was a story about Mario Puzo, who wrote The Godfather, and how much money he made when he sold the paperback and movie rights for the novel. So I looked at it, and I was naive. I said, wow, that seems like a pretty easy way to make a lot of money. Write a book and then sell rights. So that's what I did. I wrote some bad novel length fiction, learned a lot about the publishing industry as I got rejection slip after rejection slip. But that was the motivation for the first one. I loved writing. So writing for me was a hard task, but I loved doing it. And then, Mario Puzo made a couple of bucks selling the rights to The Godfather. That was the immediate motivator back, 40 some odd years ago. So it's a little bit embarrassing to say that, but it's true. Yeah.
I'm curious. Do you remember how much he made? I want to see, did he really make as much money as, because The Godfather is one of those movies that's forever in American cinema history.
Yeah. And so I don't remember the dollar amount that was in the story in Time or Newsweek, but in terms of what people make in 2022 or in the 21st century for movie rights and paperback rights, Mario Puzo got robbed. Yeah, he didn't make them an offer that they couldn't refuse. Money was nothing. I mean, it was obviously good money at the time. I don't remember what it is, so I'm not going to try to make up a number, but it was nothing like some of the book and movie deals you read about nowadays. I mean, even adjusted for inflation and 2022 numbers, it was not that much money. No.
Not like George Lucas got for Star Wars.
No, I don't think so. No. Yeah.
I think he got at least $900 million or at least $1 billion from Disney for Star Wars.
Nothing. I mean, this was in, if I'm not mistaken, I mean, this was in the 7-figure range, the low 7. So it made it hit 8. I don't think it hit 8 figures. I don't think it was over. I don't think it would hit $10 million. But I shouldn't say anything about the actual amount because I don't really remember. But it would have been good money for a Catholic school teacher.
Absolutely. Or a comparison, Now, you've written a recent book. We talked about it several times on the Fully Human Connections podcast. Yeah. And I want to give you an opportunity to share with our listening audience the title of the book. And then it's a 2-part question. And it's also, why did you write the book now?
Yeah. So what I'll do is I'll say the name, but I'll just hold it up because I'm learning to, not be ashamed of. I don't know if that's in focus or not. But the title is Healing America's Narratives, and the subtitle is The Feminine, the Masculine, and Our Collective National Shadow. So that's official launch date is October 1st, but it's already available. It just went available last week. But to your question, why did I write that book now? So now for me covers about a 6 or 7 year span. I got the inspiration to write a couple of blog posts in 2016 and 2018 because of the current events in this country, mainly political events, but not only political events, events of social events and events involving gender and race in this country. And I wrote a couple of blog posts, and then I realized in 2016 that the book might have, that the blogs might have the potential to grow into a book length work of nonfiction. But it wasn't really until 2018, 2019 that I began to work on that. And it was pretty much because for all of the critiques I could make about the United States of America, and the book has plenty of critiques in it. I love this country. I love what its possibilities are. And what I saw was just a deterioration of integrity, of truthfulness, that what I felt was grounded in what I call the American collective shadow. And it's really grounded in ignorance and arrogance and greed and violence and a few other things I identify in the book. So I was, I wrote the book now because I feel it's really needed. And both, I don't like to say I'm happy to say this. I am, because the book is done and it's now in the promotional and marketing phase. But I'm really unhappy to say that everything I wrote about over the last 3 years full-time, but about 6 years on and off with the blog posts and things, unfortunately, everything in the book is still relevant today. Like what I say in the book, I don't think this is self-aggrandizing to say this, is necessary in this country right now. What I point to in the book, and I don't see it going away in the next year or two suddenly. I care deeply about the possibility that this country has, because it's so unique. It was created 246 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
It's young. It's in its adolescence at best. So I just felt that I wrote it out of a sense of both outrage and love, is probably the best way to say it. Outrage at what I saw happening, and love for what I think is possible.
Yeah. I'm curious to know, as a nonfiction writer, are your books, or do you find your books really fully finished, or do you find yourself, like, based on certain events, something else you may have learned, discovered after the book is finished and published, you say to yourself, I need to either come up with another revision, or I wish I had put this in the book? Have you ever had those thoughts?
Every day. No, yeah. So the book, the process for me was a process of deletion, because I didn't want to write a 2,000-page book. And just really quickly, so I address this idea of shadow, but I address it through 5 specific lenses, which you and I have been speaking about. Really briefly, those I'll really kind of reduce them to a word or two. So one is race, one is gender, one is the Vietnam War, one is, well, race actually is in 2 chapters. So African Americans and Native Americans, Vietnam War, and then post 9/11 war against terror. And all of those are both historical and current events in this country. So as I was writing the book, and this is not funny, it was really hard. What do I try to include as I'm getting the book close to completion, and things keep happening related to what I'm writing about? So just something as simple as the January 6th hearings, dealing with the hearings on the January 6th insurrection, attack on the Capitol. I write about that insurrection and the president at the time in the book, and that began to unfold as the book was coming to a close. Events involving women and people of color in this country continue to be in the news, and each of those has a chapter in the book. So it was a process of deletion, and also wanting to write a book that was not so long that nobody would buy it. I mean, I'm in it for the love, but I would like the book to be read by people. So as it was, it ended up with the notes and the bibliography and all the front and rear matter, the book is 525 pages. Of that, 350 of it is the actual text, but there's like 80 pages of notes. So keeping it from getting too unwieldy was important as well to me. So yes, really challenging to write a book that touches on current events, and especially the scope of this book, because it's not just about one thing. The one thing is the United States of America, but it takes psychological, historical, political, and the last two chapters, spiritual perspectives on it. So it was challenging not to keep going back and add things. And I've always been relatively disciplined. So I got to a point that that's it. No matter what happens tomorrow, I'm going to edit this. I'm going to, proofread it, but I'm not going to add anything to it. And I was pretty good holding myself to that commitment, but it wasn't easy. So thank you for asking that, because I don't think anybody has ever asked me that question before. And it was hard. The hardest thing was, what do I include and what do I leave out? Yeah.
I can imagine. And this probably this next question maybe an excellent segue. That answer you gave maybe an excellent segue to this next question, which is, what was your biggest challenge with completing this book? I think you probably already answered it, but if you want to expand a little more.
Yeah. So I'd love to expand on that, because the biggest challenge with completing the book was acknowledging in the book, and I chose to do this. In fact, there's one chapter I dedicated to this. It's chapter 8, where I really acknowledge the issues that I could have included that are important in this country that I didn't give an individual chapter to. And those include climate change, which, the running joke about that with people who know me is, well, if we don't address that one, all the other problems are moot because we're all going to die. So, so I say that in a kind of funny way, but you and I both know that as we're talking, there's this huge hurricane zeroing in on Florida. And who knows how that's going to play out. So climate change, America's culture of violence doesn't get its own chapter, although it's present in all the other chapters, Vietnam, Native Americans, African American chapters. So there's violence in all of those. What I call the prioritizing money and things over people in this country. The problem with capitalism as it's practiced in the United States. So I mentioned each of those gets a couple of pages or a couple of paragraphs, and there's some others in that chapter 8. But deciding, which of those 5 to give a chapter to, I mentioned those already, and which to just kind of summarize in another chapter, that was really challenging for me, because part of it was my desire to please everybody who has their own agenda, which I know I can't do. So, but to acknowledge that there is a lot of suffering out there caused by a lot of different sources for a lot of different people, and I couldn't write about all of it. So deciding what to focus on and what to make secondary in the book, not as a secondary in a given person's life, that was really challenging to me from a perspective. Which perspectives can I privilege in this book, and which am I going to kind of give a secondary mention to, because I can't do it all. Yeah.
Which leads to this question: would you see yourself coming out with a second edition, continue along those lines and talk about other narratives that you want to deal with as well, that you left out of this book?
Yeah. So, so right now I have no plans in place, because I've come committing for the next year to promote and market this book through, through readings, through what we're doing. You've been a great gift to me and a partner for me in speaking about the book. So I really appreciate that. But, I'm a small independent publisher. And so nobody's going to read about it in New York Times Book Review. And so I'm committing to a year of that. But if I see something specific that's tied to the theme of this book, America's Shadow and Healing Our Collective Narratives, that I believe needs a bigger spotlight shown upon it, I will definitely write that book. Yeah. Right now, I don't have a direction to go there, so I'm not focused on that. But if something comes up, especially because of this initial book, yeah, I could definitely see a second edition coming out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, I kind of want to ask this question about your profession as a coach, and I'm always curious to know people who choose to be coaches. You know, and I know you're also a coach in high school as well, but this question is going to be more directed towards business. You're helping people to kind of transform their lives and put structure and accountability in their lives. What do you enjoy most about that?
Yeah, so as a coach, what I enjoy most about working with any given client is watching him or her begin to see, first, if they haven't done too much work on themselves already, begin to see that they have a perspective and they have an interior. Because some wonderful people who are really talented at what they do in the world aren't tuned in yet to their interior life, and aren't really that self-aware. And as they begin to become self-aware, whether it's their personality, their biases, their gifts, you can begin to see them kind of blossom. And I'm talking about some of my clients are people who have, in their 30s, have made more money than I ever will in my life already. They're young entrepreneurs and are really gifted at what they do. But when and I don't coach them in business, so I'm not a business coach. I'm a human development coach. I understand human beings fairly well, and that's what I've committed 30 years to studying. So I help them know themselves, who they are and who they aren't, and how that plays into what they do in the world. And as they begin to see the possibilities for transformation, they just light up. So that's immensely satisfying to me. And I almost missed the opportunity to do that because when I got trained as a coach, I was afraid to coach people. This is over a decade ago in the business world, because I felt that I could only coach artists and educators because that's the world I lived in as a teaching poet and as a high school and college educator. So I knew I could talk to educators and artists about their work because I lived in that world. And fortunately, I had a lot of good supporters of other coaches who went through the same training, who came out of the corporate world and out of the entrepreneurial world. He said to me, they smacked me in the head, basically. They said, you don't have to know anything about business because you're not coaching them about their business. You're coaching them about themselves. And it took me a couple of years to believe that. But it was true. So to go back to our earlier point we made at the top of the call, to watch somebody begin to find their own path with light is immensely satisfying, especially now that I know I can do it. I've done it enough times where I say, all right, thinking I can't do this with the next client is kind of a goofy thing to think. But it took me a while to learn what, in fact, I was coaching and what I wasn't coaching. Once I figured that out, it's just really, it's a beautiful process to be engaged with another human being in that kind of give and take. Yeah.
Now, again, I'm sure this question is going to be a challenging question because you made a lot of decisions in your life. You make a lot of decisions every single day. Yeah. But I'm really curious to know, has there been one decision that kind of stands out that you've made in your life that has been the most significant or the most meaningful?
Yeah, what comes up, and I'll go to an answer B if this one doesn't suffice. But when you asked me the earlier question about what I'm most grateful for of choices that I've made, I would say it's the same answer. And basically, the decision that I made to pursue those things that really kind of fed my soul. I didn't have the language back then when I first did this, but I almost went to law school. And I don't say that in a glib way that, I would have graduated and been a great lawyer, but I almost went to law school. And I was offered I had coached high school basketball my senior year at St. John's University. So while I was still a student, I got the freshman coaching gig at my alma mater. And I wanted to do that for at least one more year. I loved coaching enough that I wanted to do that again. So I found a way to take some odd jobs so I could still coach the basketball, freshman basketball team a second time. And while I was doing that, they had an opening in the English department. And again, this was my alma mater, and they trusted me. And they said, "Are you available to teach for the second half of the school year?" And I said, "Yeah." And I realized that I loved being in the classroom. So from that point forward, I never did work that wasn't close to my soul work. Now, I didn't know this language back then, but I almost left teaching after my second or third year, 1981, because of the money. I mean, Catholic school teacher in the late 70s, early 80s, and in New York. I mean, I began making $8,800 a year, and after 3 years, I was making maybe like $9,300 a year. And I almost left, and it was a really painful moment because I loved what I was doing, but I was looking down the road, and if I stayed for 30 years, like the max you could make at the time was like $40K. I was good enough at math to know that wasn't a good deal. So, but I ended up really spending some time making that decision. I stayed, and I don't regret that. So I've always stayed true to, doing what I felt was feeding me and my soul professionally. And I never took a job just because it was going to pay me more money. Now, that also made some years in my life challenging financially. So it wasn't all, bliss and unicorns and angels coming down. But I think that was a really important decision. And that also allowed me in my summers to not take extra work. I did some basketball camps, but I wrote during my summers. I wrote poetry. I wrote, the unpublished fiction manuscript. And I don't regret. I think that's a really important decision to stay true to that. Now, if I had another lifetime, I would take better care of finances earlier in my life. Mm-hmm. That's an important thing for me to say, because I learned the hard way that, struggling financially isn't good for your energy. And I struggled financially for a number of years. And it's just, kind of brings the energy down when you're in that struggle point. So absolutely. That would be my decision. It's just that same move. Yeah.
Absolutely. In listening to your answer, I came up with a title for your memoir. When you write your memoir, the title should be, "I almost went to law school," and then deal with all the things you discovered in your life as a result of not going to law school. But I think that'd be a catchy title.
Okay, so if I write that book, do you get a royalty based on giving me the title?
Absolutely. It's recorded. This is evergreen. It's always going to be here. So I'll be able to point to this and say, I gave you the idea, and I want 50% of all royalties from the point forward in perpetuity as well.
Okay. So I would just a really quick anecdote where I asked that question, and so my hero growing up with Chris Christopherson, I was 16 when I first heard him, and I won't get into all the details, but Me and Bobby McGee was his best-selling hit, primarily because Janis Joplin recorded it shortly before she died. Mm-hmm. And the title Me and Bobby McGee was given to Christopherson, which rarely happened, by the guy who was actually publishing his music at the time. I just lost his name. And so once Christopherson finished the song, before it was recorded or anything, he gave his music producer half of the song. So basically said, anything we make on this, half is going to you because of the title. And so, Christopherson has said it probably cost him it was over $1 million over the course of because the song was recorded by like I don't know how many different artists for a number of years, but it was you got it actually helped him break into the music industry in Nashville. I should know his name too, but half of the royalties from me and Bob McGee went to the guy who just came up here. Here's a good title. See if you can write a song for this. So I love that story, and Christopherson's level of integrity and just saying, all right, here it is. So you get, if I write that book with that title, as you said, it's recorded and half of it is going to go to you.
Well, I wouldn't demand half. I was joking, but
No,
I appreciate whatever you give. But that reminds me of a point. It's an old saying, and I read it said, if you think when people just say books were expensive, then the saying was, if you think education is expensive, imagine how much ignorance costs.
Yeah.
And the same token, if you think your integrity, that cost of its integrity was expensive, imagine how much it would be having how much money he's lost as a result of not having integrity. So it can go both ways, right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Now, my next question, and as a connector in my business, I'm, my background is system engineering, and I'm a very detailed, methodical, systems thinking, logical thinking person. So in building connections, I came up with what I consider to be 8 characteristics that I want a person to have of a connection I want to make, regardless of the relationship is going to be. Not that I expect a person to have all 8, but I do expect to at least have 2 of these 8, and I'm going to share them with you. And then my question is going to be, do you have any characteristics you look for when you establish a relationship as well? So mine, number 1 is being principle-centered. Number 2, value-driven. Number 3, action-oriented. Number 4, results-focused. Number 5, growth mindset. Number 6, servant leadership. Number 7, accountability acceptor. And number 8 is having a grateful spirit. Now, to me, 2 of those are non-negotiable, so to speak. That is the growth mindset and being a person who's principle-centered. And now, with that being said, and I also had to hold myself accountable when I came up to that list and say, well, do I have all 8 of those characteristics? And that forces me to realize it's a journey, not a destination. That I have to work on it every single day and hold myself accountable in that context. So now, with that being said, do you have any kind of key characteristics that you look for when someone wants to connect with you, someone wants to build with you or whatever, connect with you on LinkedIn or any kind of introduction that you might meet someone? Are there certain things you look for, or you've got a person has to have before you accept or begin to build with them?
Yeah, so I'm going to go, and thank you for those 8. I've seen that in some of your slides and your postings before, and I'm really happy you didn't ask me to remember all 8 of them, because I wouldn't have been able to. The two were the growth mindset and the what was it, value centered,
Principle centered.
Principle centered, yeah. I remembered 1.5, so God forgive me. So I don't really have a list like that, but I will go back to an earlier question, because I think these 3 things are important about the way I answered the question on co-creation. The idea that I don't want work to be a slog, so having the ability to have fun with someone, and by that I just mean we can be relaxed in our conversation. We laugh relatively easily. That's one. That is complimentary. That somebody compliments me and I compliment them as well would be important to me. And so those probably be my first. The first 2 that I would really feel strongly about. But again, I admit that I haven't given that a lot of preemptive thought. And what I end up trusting is my gut. I have a relatively, it's not perfect. It's not like a Geiger counter looking for radioactivity. But I have a pretty good gut sense of people. And even like when you and I met on the Fully Human podcast in June. We've known each other for less than half a year. How many months? Yeah, definitely have to count the months. And immediately, and this no pun intended, but I felt we immediately connected. I really respected the types of questions you ask, beginning with the gratitude question in the Fully Human Connections podcast. And then our ability to laugh at things amid serious conversations. So my gut response to meeting you that day in an hour podcast, I felt safe and challenged at the same time. So I have this kind of innate sense, and again, it's not 100%, it's not foolproof. I've been wrong. I'm not wrong with you, but I've been wrong in the past. But I'm not as, probably not as specifically a systems thinker as you are. I think I'm pretty good looking at big pictures, but I don't think I don't have that systematized. Here are the 8 things that I look for. But I trust my gut at this stage of the game, and I could probably identify what those things are that inform my gut.
Okay. And the next question kind of piggybacks on that and the question prior to, as far as co-creating, but a little bit more specific because it involves a lot more, I would say, maybe legality as well. But what I do is I help conscious leaders work toward their higher purpose. And when you understand you have a higher purpose, you realize that most 9 times out of 10, it's not something you can achieve by yourself. So you have to go out here and build relationships. I like to say build connectionally intelligent tribes in order to make that happen. But along that line, there has to be strategic relationships that you have to build. And so with that being said, who would be a great strategic partner for you? It doesn't have to be a name, but the type of characteristics or a type of skill set that someone can complement, as you talked about before, in what you're doing in your life.
Yeah, so that one really hits home for me, especially, but not only because of the current status of the book launch for the new book and really trying to get it out into the world. So, right now, the best strategic partner for me would be somebody who is good at and enjoys various elements of marketing, because it's something, as a coach and as an author, what I'm basically marketing is myself as a coach and as an author. And so self-promotion, I understand intellectually that there's nothing wrong with it and that it's necessary for the two, for writing and coaching, but it's not something that has come easily to me. And I have, specifically because of the nature of this particular project, I've met some people who have just kind of stepped up and said, "I'll help you with that." I mean, you're one. You were, I'm not gonna say you fell in love with that, might be true, but you were really intrigued by the title, and then when you got to look at the early draft of the manuscript, you really were intrigued by that. So you're an example of someone who just invited me on to do the podcast. There's somebody else with whom I work who actually builds websites for a living, and she said, "I want to help you with the book launch and help you with the website, the web development for the book's website." So that's the type of thing that's been really helpful to me. Because I have, I'm doing some social media advertising, which is paid advertising, and I'm learning how to do that. But the strategic partner for me would be somebody who both is good at and knows how to do all of that stuff, because I'm doing that now, and I'll be doing it for the next year. I got up every morning for 3 years and wrote for 2 or 3 hours every morning before I started doing my coaching and things. And the writing wasn't always easy, but I loved every minute of it. I get up every morning now and I do marketing stuff, and I don't love every moment. No, I'm learning to do it, and I'm happy to do it because I know it's part of the book project, but it's nothing like sitting down and writing for me. It's a whole different thing. So I do it because it's a necessary component if I would like what I write to be read by other human beings, and I would like that. So I might have rambled a bit there at the end, but did I answer the question you asked, Ken?
You did, and I appreciate your answer, definitely.
Yeah.
The next question would be, now I notice that every time we talk, and I mean literally every single time, You always bring a level 10 energy to the conversation. You always seem very positive, very upbeat, and very, I would say, a person who enjoys life. And so I'm curious to know, when I talk to conscious leaders who exhibit these type of behaviors, are there certain things that you do in the morning? I say your morning rituals. It could be evening rituals as well, that you do to kind of tune out all the negative energy that our society and our media tries to force into your head, from racism, politics, environmental issues. Um, what do you do to kind of keep yourself away from that and keep you in the state, the 10 state that you're at now?
Yeah. I'll put an asterisk at the beginning of my response, since a lot of what I've been doing is writing about all those issues that are kind of training. So
Okay.
that's a real part of it. But what and this is my 68-year-old version answer, because it would be different it was different in my 40s and in my 30s. But first thing I do when it's time to get up is I get into my body. So I do it before I even get out of bed. I just do some basic stretching and things in the bed, and just really kind of get in touch with my vehicle, the thing that allows me to, carry my head around and eat and different things. That's it's 5 minutes tops. So then I go in, I wash my face, and I just do some basic movements standing up, which is everything from shoulder rolls to I just move every part of my body from the standing position. That takes about 10 minutes. And then I sit on the meditation cushion. Actually, not anymore. I kneel on a meditation bench because I have 2 hip replacements, and I don't cross my legs that well anymore. And I just get quiet. And that, depending on the morning, it's typically around 20 minutes. It's been as long as 40, but I don't do that regularly. And it's been as brief as 10. And then I go have breakfast. I don't check the news anywhere. I put on some music that I like while I'm having breakfast. And then that takes, all of that together takes about an hour and a half, give or take, including breakfast. And when I get up to begin work, the first thing I do is I scan a couple of my trusted news sources for maybe 10 minutes, and then I work. So I do want to know what's happening in the world in which I live. But I don't get news on this machine, this little phone thing. I don't use it for that. I don't like looking at a screen that's small. I don't. I have access to it, but I don't use that. But I read my news. I scan for stories that I think are important, and I just get to work, and I leave all of that behind. But it's that staying quiet and being embodied for the first half an hour or so once I'm awake that I think is the most important piece for me. That allows me to stay centered and remember who I am and what it is I'm about to do with my day.
Now we're down to the last 2 questions. I would say arguably my favorite questions of the interview, because they tell me a lot. The data, I'm a data gatherer. There's a lot of data in these 2 questions. Well, my first question, let me kind of frame it, then I ask it as well.
Yeah.
Is there a kin connection you would like to meet? Now, what I mean by kin connections, I'm not referring to my name or my company name. It's a title that I've given to an individual who has achieved either success, career, professional, personal, that if you met this individual, you want to co-create with them and you all can make something wonderful happen. And because I've developed a process for getting to any individual. I believe anybody is accessible. It's just the right connections to that individual. And if they're truly living in something that's purposefully, they will see value in connecting with you. And then when you do connect with them, not as a fan where your leverage is here and they're there, it's more of you coming together to co-creators. So for example, mine would be Magic Johnson. I believe that as a community builder, I know he's a great basketball player, but that's not what I'm interested in. Is his humanitarian work, his business mind, and the work that he does around the communities. I think him and I came together, we would make some great things happen. So do you have a kin connection that you would like to meet, that it could be a celebrity or anybody that you felt that you already come together, it could grow what you're doing exponentially?
Yeah, the problem with that question, and the problem is with me, not with with the question, is there's probably so many. Because the first place I went before you really described it was the number of people I would like to meet just to have a conversation with. People I met through their writing and their research as I was writing my own book. There's a whole list of those who aren't, they really aren't entrepreneurial, and they're not the strategic partners that I need to move my own work forward, but I would just love to be able to meet them and have conversation. So there's a bunch of those. In terms of the strategic partner, Magic's a great choice. I have the basketball background, and what he's done entrepreneurial, since, is just wonderful. That's a tough one for me to pick one.
Oh, you don't have to pick one. You can pick 2 or 3 that come to your mind, because I believe it takes several kin connections to get to that kin connection. So it's not just one. I just gave you one of mine.
All right. So one that came up, and it's tied in with your saying Magic Johnson. So I'll say, one is Kenny Smith, who played at Malloy in Queens, and then played at North Carolina, and then in the NBA, and won championships, and now he's on the NBA TNT show. But I met him when he was a high school kid. I coached him for a week at summer camp. I had nothing to do with his career or success. He just got assigned to my team, and I didn't make him any worse, I'm pretty sure. So it was good. But seeing who he became, I knew him between his junior and senior year in high school, and seeing him, watched him play in college and in the NBA, and then seeing him now, his presence and his insight, both in terms of basketball and what he did on camera around the protests after the George Floyd murder, was really, he walked off the set. He supported the NBA players who were, stepping out in protest of what happened to George Floyd. So just this level of integrity, I just really admired, that piece for him. So that's one. I know I'm talking a lot here, and we're over time. Someone like Tim Ferriss, who has, I'm not a strict follower of him, but I think he has said a lot of things out loud ever since he introduced the 4-hour work weeks. I don't know how long ago that was now. I think he's put some good stuff out there into the world, and he's a guy that knows how to connect on a big scale. So he'd be another one. But again, I say that apologetically, because I'm not really a big follower of his, but I know who he is. I'll just say those 2 for now.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then my last question would be, what book would you like to recommend to our listening audience? And I know that, you and I joked about this before, that the books behind you is not your graphic background that was created. I know some people have those background, but those are real books. So I'm really curious to know, do you have any particular book that you will say, this book has had the most impact and influence on my life?
Yeah, there's a lot of those, but I'm going to speak to the one that's most important to me right now. So, and I'll give a couple of second and third places too. But right now, the book that's most important to me, and I've read it 4 or 5 times, and I go back to it. I read a sentence or 2 every day from it. It's called "Bring Me the Rhinoceros." And it's by John Tarrant, Tarrant, and it's basically where he's a Zen practitioner, and he's a koan expert. The Zen koans that are kind of like, I don't want to say riddles, but they're used in Zen training to take people out of their linear rational minds. And what that book does for me, almost any page I turn to, is it doesn't matter if I'm writing or I'm talking about gender or race or violence or America or poetry or whatever. It shows me my own mind. It shows me what my own mind does and doesn't do, how my own mind gets in the way, and how my own mind can really serve me. So it's this brilliant, relatively brief book where he unpacks, I think, 12 or 15 Zen koans and tells you how to work with them and shows you your own mind. So that's the book that has really served me over the last decade. I would say at the opposite end of the spectrum, I would say Ken Wilber's The Religion of Tomorrow, which is an 800+ page tome which is just a deep dive into human development and stages of development. And then there's, I could go on. I mean, there's so many that really have impacted me. But John Tarrant's Bring Me the Rhinoceros is the current one, because I've read it cover to cover, I think 3 times, but I tend to read a snippet of that every day just to remind me, oh yeah, that. This is what my mind can do at its best, and this is what it does at its worst. And I need to remember how this thing works. I shouldn't even point it there because it's not just between my ears either. So, yeah.
I've done over at least 100 interviews. No one has ever said, which I'm waiting for the first person to say it, I was kind of hoping you would say it, is George Orwell's Animal Farm.
Okay.
But no one has ever said it, and I've never thought about that question until you gave me your answer about the rhinoceros. Yeah. And that animal brought animal, that made that relationship in my mind just that fast, and how influential that book was. But I definitely want to thank you for joining me on the podcast today, Reggie. Again, enjoyed the conversation as always. You gave some very insightful answers, and that's the kind of answers that I like to share with my audience at King Connections, because it's really about who you are as a conscious leader, how you live in your lifestyle, and just I want my people to connect with you as a person. They can read your bio from the description, but it's the answers that you gave and the energy that you said those answers in that I believe is going to resonate very well with my audience. So thank you for your investment of time and energy with that. And as I close out, are there any closing thoughts you want to share with our listening audience, as well as any contact information you'd like to share as well, how they can get in touch with you?
Yeah, so first thing, you're welcome, and thank you very much for inviting me, because I've enjoyed this, and you made me think, and so which I love. So you challenged me to really, to clarify some things that I haven't thought about. So thank you for that. I would invite people, if they want to find out more, to go to either my name, Reggie Marra, MARRA, 2 R's.com, or healingamericasnarratives.com. And there are ways to get in touch there. And go to Healing America's Narratives so you find out about the book too. That's the best place. But no, I'm just really grateful to you, King, for inviting me on. And I would say to the people who listen, healing, both individually and as a nation, I believe is possible. And I also believe it's not particularly easy. And we need it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, again, Reggie, thank you. And listening audience, thank you for listening to another episode of King Connections Podcast. Until our next show, I want to wish everyone a blessed and productive day. Thank you again, Reggie.
Thank you, King.